Uh, and today we have an excellent, a group of panelists who have like different levels of experience as PhD students and as well as as a faculty member at this point. So yeah, so without further ado, I would first introduce myself. So I am Arun. I am a PhD student at the University of Pittsburgh. I work in education technologies, specifically like learning analytics, uh, analyzing log data, detecting patterns. My interest in motivation is to kind of uh, solve some of these research questions related to student motivation or engagement with data analysis. So yeah, that's where I'm at. Um, so I would now start introducing the panelists, and I'm gonna have to do a little bit of magic here. So bear with me. Okay, so you're still able to see my screen, right? So first person on the panel that I'm going to introduce is Ariana. She is a PhD student. Oh, I forgot to check the pronouns, but hopefully I can refer to her as she is a PhD candidate at Old Dominion University. She studies academic achievement, emotions, and STEM persistence, and is interested in how social context impact students' motivation, belonging, and emotions. And someone is hopefully pasting a research article that she has written with her co-authors. Uh, Now I'm moving on to the next panelist, and I'm going to resume share and pause share again. And the next panelist we have is Ariana Black, who is a doctoral candidate in the educational psychology program at Ohio State University. I believe she works with Elise Allen, who is also a chair of the student MotSig. Ariana's research focuses on academic motivation with a particular interest in how the classroom social context affects underrepresented students' motivation in STEM. She employs both quantitative and qualitative methodologies in her research. Ariana also teaches an introductory educational psychology course for pre-service teachers and serves as a graduate editorial assistant for theory in practice. After graduating, Ariana plans to pursue a position in academia, continuing with both teaching and educational research. In her free time, she enjoys hiking, backpacking, and traveling with her husband, as well as spending time with her puppy Finn. Okay, nice. Yeah. So that's Ariana, and I'm going to introduce Joey, uh, who is uh, who is one of the most active members that I have known in MotSig. Personally, also I've worked with him for the affinity groups, now called the Graduate Student Discuss. So Joey is a doctoral candidate studying educational psychology and an adjunct faculty at the Temple University, which is in Philadelphia. His research examines the relationship between empathy, emotions, identity, and motivation using complex dynamics systems approaches. He is on the job market. Do you have a job for him? So yeah, that's his motto, or like the bottom line. Like how do you say that? Yeah. So that's him. And finally we have Dr. Narmada Paul. So I'm gonna resume sharing. I'm not sure if everything is working in terms of sharing, but let's hope that's the case. Okay. So uh, Dr. Narmada Paul is a clinical assistant professor in educational psychology at the University of Kentucky. She earned her PhD in educational studies from Ohio State University in 2018. Her research focuses on answering the following questions. So, what motivates students to learn argumentation skills? How can technology support motivation and collaborative argumentation? How do students' identities, example, immigrant students, international students, shape their experiences in learning environments? Her work on students' motivation to revise their argumentative writing has been featured in the conversation. I think there's a link that we will be sharing about that. Her current projects have received funding through Division C Learning and Instruction of the American Educational Research Association and the US Department of Education. At the University of Kentucky, she teaches graduate level courses in the following areas: motivation and learning, human development, cognitive development, and research methods. So yeah, lots of really interesting questions actually that she's actually addressing it. Yeah, now that it's great to have you, Dr. Nurmada Paul, and also others uh, um who who are at different stages of your PhD. Mostly everyone is in their candidacy, so I mean, it's just the one is the other side of the line, and the others are just on the other side. I mean, it's whichever way you want to look at the line, whether you're looking at it from after PhD versus pre-PhD. So yeah, okay. So I guess that's about it. So without much, I will stop without anything else to do. I think there are no other announcements to make as such. Um, Recently we had Thanksgiving. I guess I hope everyone had a good break. If you had a break, as in like a week break, and probably you went to visit your family, had some good time, and probably feeling refreshed. Uh, in my case, I wanted to use the break for catching up with work, and I actually didn't do that. So, yeah. And I guess there were a few other holidays like Veterans Day, Native American Heritage Day, Education Support Professionals Day during American Education Week. I hope these were all in November. Yeah, looks like November was full of different days, important days, and the GSE recognizes, appreciates, and applauds all of the individuals from many walks of life who have contributed and continue to contribute to educational research. So, yeah, uh, I think we have covered all of the things. So I'm going to stop sharing and we can get started with the questions. So, so usually the way we do this is we start with some panelist questions, and then uh, we let the audience ask the questions once we are through with the list. So the first question on our list is, I'm going to also open the other file just to compare. Okay, yeah. So the first question that we have is, what are the stages involved towards preparation and successful completion of various PhD milestones in your program? And I would like to also mention that uh, your program might have different milestones than my program, for example. So we can all acknowledge that as we actually answer this question. But I think more or less, as you meet a certain milestone, there's always that. I mean, you kind of get it. So if you need to do something for, if there's a requirement, I think people work for that. So it makes sense. It might just be like one or two things different across different programs. So uh, yeah, so I think most people get the general sentiment. It just might be, formally a different requirement. So yeah, and we can go over at different stages, like break them down as prelims, comprehensive exams, or however they might be called. And then of course, candidacy and proposal defense. That's almost common across any program in PhD. So yeah, and anyone can start, whoever feels ready.
I can go first.
No, no, go ahead.
Sure. And thank you again for inviting me. I am excited to be here, and it's so cool to see so many different people who some of you have obviously I have met you in person, and some of you I'm meeting for the first time, but it's really this is a really cool group of people with like you said, that the panel obviously has a different has diversity in terms of experiences that they are bringing to the table. I can definitely speak to it from two different perspectives. One from when I was a student, and the other because I now have been on the other side and evaluated. I've been on dissertation committees now, so I can and you're right. Like, I think one of the observations that you made was institutionally there could be different milestones that you will need to hit. So when I was at OSU, so I know that some of you are also from OSU, so go Bucks. I know that we had a lot of support for UK on the chat, but hey, but I also want to acknowledge my OSU roots. But OSU definitely had the like the qualifying exam, then you did the proposal defense, and then you became a candidate, and then you had the dissertation defense. So that was a pretty like a 3-step process almost after your coursework was complete. And at UK, I think in the EdSci program, at least, you submit a research portfolio, which again, kind of, you need to make sure that you hit certain milestones. So you typically have a manuscript that is in preparation. You may not have submitted it to a journal, but you need to have it ready. A submission to a conference, like a conference proposal. Your courses have to be done. So those are the things. So in the portfolio, all of this is kind of going in, and then the faculty member on your dissertation committee, they kind of evaluate to make sure that each of these components are meeting expectations. And once your portfolio has been evaluated, then you are basically through to move on to the next step, which is the qualifying exam. And then pretty much it's exactly what I had mentioned was my situation at OSU as a student. So that's kind of like what the steps are. And like I said, that the two institutions were a little bit different in what milestones were formally part of the process.
Does anyone want to go next?
I can jump in. Nice to see everyone. Hi. Just want to also say that I have quite literally never been in a context with another Ariana before. So this should be, except for meeting you at AERA, that was lovely. But in a recorded situation, if you need to call on us, this is the first time I ever get to say my last name. Very exciting. So to the how do you prepare yourself for these milestones part? I think a big thing for me was reading widely, and without I don't even know the right word, but just read anything and everything, whatever sparks your interest at the beginning. And then as you're getting close to the preliminaries with comps, whatever your institution has, narrowing down toward that focus. And I know there's questions on that later, but reserving that time for yourself, even if it's just 10 minutes, where you're skimming through a couple articles, picking out an interesting one to go into deeper, knowing what's out there, knowing the literature, that's only going to help. And I found that really enjoyable and helpful when I was writing my comprehensive exams, for sure.
I'll jump in, piggyback off what Ariana W said, and just add that if you have the opportunity to taking courses a little bit more widely is also really valuable. So for example, for me, that looked like taking a lot of methods courses, and I really enjoyed that. And I felt like it helped me prepare for my comprehensive exams, and also helped spark some interest in how I'd be interested in my own methods for my dissertation. So I felt like that was something that was really helpful. And then in terms of milestones to complete, I would say very similar to what Dr. Paul mentioned. Of course, we're at the same institution. So it's finishing courses, your comps and your defense and dissertation proposal before you finally complete your dissertation and defend that.
Thank you again also for the invitation. And I'm actually really excited to talk about this because it's quite different, I think, from many other universities. I know Jessica Hadid, who also goes to Temple with me, can speak to this very directly. Temple does not have a qualifying exam. We have we have a comprehensive evaluation. And the comprehensive evaluation, in preparation for it, I think the most important thing, which is not surprising, is do your homework, get involved with things. That could be service projects, that could be research projects, but getting involved, I think, is really helpful, and doing the homework, reading, as Ariana Wajlewicz was talking about. This is interesting because now I have to talk about both of you independently. Ariana Black, Ariana White. This is amazing. I find that those were really important in preparation for the evaluation. The evaluation at Temple, I think, is actually really impressive because it's not necessarily a test of your knowledge, because that you would have done through your courses. It is instead a preparation for the job market. So you have to write a manuscript. It doesn't have to be published yet. Kind of like what Dr. Paul, I think you were talking about earlier. We also have to write a research proposal. Also, it doesn't have to be submitted. It could also be one that already was submitted. Same with the manuscript. And then on top of that, you have to prepare a CB, a research statement, a teaching statement, a service statement, and you have to prepare the materials that would be necessary for the job. I found that those things were really helpful for where I am now on the job market. Of course, these things have changed significantly since then, but it allowed me to start to understand what is necessary as I built my own package, my materials for the job market. The committee makeup was also very important because we do have a separate committee that's not your dissertation committee, that is your evaluation committee. And I found that that was also really important in considering who are the members of my committee that I will want to be a part of that group. That was important because it not only is going to be, of course, your advisor. That's a necessity that you have to have. But on top of that are who are the people that you want to critique your abilities as a teacher, your reflection on the experiences that you had, because there's also reflective statements as well. Excuse me, I forgot to mention those. My reflection as a teacher, as a researcher, what I'm hoping to do. So on top, for me, I thought I reflected a lot on who are the people that can speak to my teaching abilities, my service abilities, my research abilities, make sure that those are the people that were in committee. Then we have the proposal stage. That's once you've completed your comprehensive evaluation and your coursework. And I took the 3-chapter route for my dissertation proposal, or my dissertation. Sorry, I wrote 3 chapters of the 5 dissertation model. And the biggest thing for that was, I think, gaining clarity on what the proposal needs to look like in advance, which is something I didn't do, which I think I wish I would have done, because there's a lot of differences between committee members, knowing how to navigate the multiple voices. So not only would I like to have known more specifically about what were the expectation that they all had, but also know how to submit them in advance. So for example, I know some faculty like to receive all 3 chapters at once. I think would have preferred 1 chapter at a time, 1 section at a time. And the last thing I want to say about the preparation and the successful completion is, once you then complete the proposal, it's a very, I find, hollow moment. And I've spoken very openly about this for my experiences. And I think that after successful completion, you must then celebrate yourself, because it's very easy to turn off Zoom, close your computer, and go back to work after you've done something that is monumentous and deserves celebration by you and all the people around you.
Right. Really interesting thoughts. And actually, I think some of you have already covered how you prepare for these different stages. So I did hear a few aspects about like that could indicate balance. So one of the questions that we have next is like, how does one balance requirements to clear these milestones in terms of like publishing content that anyone finds interesting, while also maybe helping with meeting the milestone itself. So maybe it wouldn't make sense in the earlier milestones in the PhD, but it definitely does make sense when one like starts to work towards candidacy or the defense itself, where like the publications get very focused towards the main goals and so on. So yeah, and whereas like the initial stage of the PhD is you can be doing things that might not be on your thesis. So yeah, how does that work out, and how does that help with getting more opportunities later, or delaying your PhD indirectly, like, because you're engaging in these different things and it takes some of your time. So yeah.
One thing that I will say from like just observing, because one of the things that you mentioned, Erwin, was like, what can lead to delays and how do you handle it, kind of thing. One of the things that I've seen both with people in my cohort or even students that I have taught here at UK, it's a very pragmatic thing, but just knowing when are the graduate school deadlines for graduating on time. So just making sure that you're mindful of those deadlines, because I have seen people who are prepared in terms of their intellectual work, but they may have missed something very, very like a deadline that the graduate school has in place, and that has led them to kind of jeopardize their timeline and cause significant delay. So I definitely think that's something that you should be mindful of, in addition to all the work that you're doing intellectually to prepare for each milestone. In terms of time management, and I think what the core of your question was, that how do you manage multiple projects while also working on the dissertation and making sure you're hitting all the milestones. One of the things that I found helpful as a student was, so I used to initially I had a teaching assistantship as a source of my funding, but then when I knew that I would be obviously busy with my dissertation work, I made every effort to kind of make sure that I was funded through a research assistantship, and eventually I got a research fellowship, which helped me. So basically, I didn't have to teach, and I could focus completely on my research projects, my dissertation, and all the other projects that I had going on simultaneously. But primarily, my dissertation work would obviously take a significant amount of my energy. So I think making sure that, thinking through, where is your funding coming from, and if you do have an opportunity to seek out funding that allows you to basically avoid teaching responsibilities, at least during the time when you know you're going to be really, really intensely working on your dissertation. I think that that definitely helps, because teaching is valuable, and I definitely think if you're planning to be in academia, then definitely getting that experience as a graduate student is extremely helpful. So definitely, I don't want to undermine that in any way, but at the same time, just from again a pragmatic standpoint, if you're when you're working on your dissertation, seeking out assistantships that allow you to take time away from teaching can be extremely helpful in managing those multiple responsibilities.
Fully agree. It's amazing how much mental and physical energy teaching takes, because we all want to do a really good job at that. One of the best pieces of advice that I got was to think of your time in graduate school as a building progression. So saying yes to projects that are eventually going to fit nicely together on your CV if you're going on the job market, and are going to build your expertise toward what your ultimate goal is, whether it's gaining a certain skill in statistics or working on a manuscript with someone that's not directly your advisor. That's gaining experience and knowledge that's going to help you once you graduate. The other projects that might seem really exciting, but maybe just slightly too far afield from what your main focus is, those are things that you want to really consider and say, like, how much is this going to help me? And is it enough to justify spending my time and my energy on it? And being confident and okay with saying no thank you, but thank you.
Yeah, I definitely echo what Ariana said in terms of being comfortable saying no to opportunities. I know, at least in my experience, I felt like graduate school it feels like this finite period of time where you have a limited number of opportunities that will be in front of you, but you do also have to be very strategic about what you say yes to, because you have finite time. And you're not here just to be a student. You also need to have a life and establish some work-life balance. And this is something I'm saying, do as I say, not as I do. So I think that's sort of been one of the tougher lessons to learn, is being really strategic with your time and the opportunities that you take on, because your time is precious. I'll also say, to the extent that you can kind of be strategic in your coursework. So for example, trying to explore different topics that you're interested in, if you have the flexibility and the autonomy to do that through like a final paper or something. That was a really strategic way that I kind of identified what topics I was interested in, whether they were going to be topics that sort of had a long-term interest, or whether it was good for a semester and, you know, it wasn't necessarily something that was going to sustain my interest later on, looking down the road toward topics I might be interested in for candidacy and dissertation. So just finding opportunities to be strategic with your time is another piece of advice I would say that will help you sort of stay on track with those milestones and not get too overwhelmed, ideally.
So to, I guess, follow a train here, yes, to everything that's been said. I really actually think that there's a lot of value in talking about funding and what's available and being conscientious and being focused. I think there's also, when I think about the requirements, there's an aspect of not knowing. So as was mentioned, there's what the graduate school might have as requirements, but then there's also what faculty might offer or what they have in mind, but it's kind of this hidden curriculum where it's never spoken. So as much as you can, ask them in advance what their expectations are for you, if you can get your hands on other versions of things, so that you don't go into a situation feeling blind or blindsided. That's really important. I think also kind of going off of Arne Black's point about goal alignment is really helpful, because potentially there is a paper you want to get on, but there also could be a project in a class that can actually be that could be in service to maybe your dissertation or proposal that you want to submit to a conference. So goal alignment is really important. And a piece of advice that I got that I really, really appreciate was, you have one job, get out of here. So as much as you can, stick with it, do the one thing you have to do, and get out of that school as fast as possible.
Yeah, that's a very good way to look at it. I think in some schools it's more like you cannot stay for long, and in the others, you have to get out. You have to consciously make that effort. So yeah, I see that from both angles. Really, thank you for getting the what I was trying to convey with that question, and I think I got the answers that I was looking for. So thank you for that. And moving on along those lines, I think it's one of the aspects that comes into play in these matters is stress, because how many things that we take on also affects, like, yeah, and I think we talked about work-life balance here. So the question that we have is like, what are some de-stressing techniques that you used while preparing and completing exam proposals? I mean, exams or proposals. Actually, let's consider all the different stages that we have been talking about from the beginning, because every stage is stressful. So let's not undermine anything. And yeah, so during your program, and do you have any favorite spots or locations that you visit to settle down and work? So yeah, and there are lots of spots like that in my city, although I don't actually use that. But there might be something that you might do, and I might take that as a cue to do that from now on. So
I'm happy to speak to this. So I actually did a lot of prep work prior to beginning my exams that I found really helpful. And a lot of it was just related to being really organized and, again, strategic about how I was going to use my time. So one way that I focused on being organized was sort of like piloting a system to organize the literature that I was going to be reading before my comprehensive exams. That way, by the time I was beginning them, I had a system. I knew it was going to work for me. So that was one thing that I found really helpful. And then the other thing is that I made a list of like self-care strategies that would be sort of my go-to as I was doing my exams. So like the last thing I wanted to think about in a moment of stress is what de-stressing technique I wanted to use. So if I had them all written down, I kept it right next to my computer. I mean, it will look different for everyone, but yoga, walking my dog, calling my mom, listening to some music, all those things were on my list, having my favorite snacks on hand. So things like that, and just not having to really think about what I was going to be doing, but just being able to say, these are my options. This is the one that's going to work right now today. So a lot of it was just like preparing ahead of time and staying really organized. That way, I didn't even have to think about certain things in the moment. So those were some de-stressing techniques that really helped me as I was doing my written exams.
And going on the planning piece, also knowing what your work habits, like what work habits work for you. So like some people really like the Pomodoro method, right? Where you just do 40 minutes on, 5 off, whatever it might be. Some people like to work in big chunks. Some people are morning people. Some people are evening people. And everybody's qualifying exams look a little different. When I did mine, I had basically 4 days to write 3 sections. And now that's lengthened out to a little over a week. But the strategies for both of those different layouts look a little different. So what I might have done, kind of hide away and protect my time, might look very different from someone who has a week-long kind of thing where they need to be more strategic about like, okay, I cannot do 8 hours a day for 9 straight days. I'm going to need to take, you know, some breaks, some rest, and some recovery. I'm not going to try to work right at 8 a.m. I see some mentions of Sharon Zumbrun and Carlton Fong in the chat that I haven't read yet, but yes, strongly endorse both of those folks. Lost my train of thought now. But giving yourself rest, like giving yourself time to rest and recover and recuperate, and knowing when your energy is going to be most well spent and like most efficiently put to the task.
I can go next. I feel like, yeah, I agree with the points that have already been made by the other panelists in terms of staying organized. So having some sort of like a to-do list and a timeline that you want to be on, particularly as you're working on your qualifying exam responses, is definitely helpful. But I think one of the things that helped me de-stress personally was also making writing a social activity. So if I was writing in a cafe, I would write with other friends. And so that was always, so that made it fun. So I think that was something that I definitely personally benefited a lot from, because I think it takes a lot of anxiety away when other people are doing it with you and going through the same emotions, so you can kind of support each other in that process. I definitely feel like if you have other people in your cohort who are going through the same timeline as you are in terms of graduating, so then you can definitely have a group where you do your writing together. And if that location is a cafe, I think that's great. Yeah.
Not to bring up things that have already been said, so I will say I actually really love a cafe for when I was writing some things, but not other things. So going back to Ariana White-Lovovich was talking about, it's really about what's useful for you, what you can do, and constantly reevaluating that, because what you think you go into as a strategy may not necessarily be what you come out of at the end. But with regard to de-stressing techniques, I find them not only important, but also actually as a necessity. I think that a lot of people should be considering these things when they enter into grad school. Like it should be taught to us essentially, or consciously brought into the conversation. So my answers honestly are go to therapy. People should be talking to other people. I think that if there's work that you find yourself focused on, get up and do it. I recall that while I was writing my proposal, I would wake up at 3 a.m, couldn't fall back asleep because I was thinking about writing all day. Sometimes I would get up and just at 3 a.m. start writing, and that would help me then de-stress a little bit, calm down, and then I could sleep for a few more hours. But I want to be clear when I say do work, it's only the work that's important to you, that's a necessity, excuse me, and that you should of course then take a break when it's available to you. And the last thing I want to say is give yourself grace and don't compare to people. I think that a lot of us try to do that, but the problem here is that we don't know what our faculty really think. We don't know what our colleagues are really thinking. We don't really know what's going on. When it comes to these things, I really like to hold on to something that Dr. Alan Wigfield once wrote in the APA Division 15's newsletter some years ago. I think it was 2 years ago now. He wrote about this idea of using evidence. So don't trust yourself, trust what everyone else is telling you, because they're probably better at evaluating what's going on around you if you are a self-critic. If you are someone who is, has a lot of positivity and is already there, go do you. That's not who I am. This is not where I'm at.
Yeah, I definitely fall for that comparison piece actually all the time. Yeah. even now, like a week ago, like someone's finishing comps and I was like, hey, we both start at the same time and all this. It just happens automatically. I just cannot do anything about it. But yeah, uh, in that note, actually, I think this like the kind of theme seems to be is that you work it out your way. What works for you might not work for others. That kind of theme. It also kind of extends towards how you work with your advisors. So the next question is about how you communicate with your advisors, like in terms of meeting these milestones. Like in my case, I have been very bad at it. I mean, every time I talk to him, it's mostly like, yeah, I mean, it comes back to did you finish get the results that we need? So it's almost like that. But I think some people are really good at it. So yeah, and then yeah, and how do you like work towards meeting these goals on time? And how do you identify and express your needs with advisors in order to meet these goals? So yeah, that's the question.
Okay, at the risk of cutting someone off. Okay, good. Not cutting anybody off. I'm just gonna jump in. I kind of don't know how to phrase what I'm trying to say, but I'm gonna just go for it. Grad school is your journey, right? Like this is your path, not your advisor's path. They've already gone through grad school. And something that was kind of on my mind when we were talking about delays, they happen, right? Like you get sick, someone in your family gets sick, you have to redo your experiment. Like delays happen. And if you have to delay a semester or delay a year, it's so easy to compare and to beat yourself up over that. Or just treat it as part of the journey. And I know that's easier said than done, but I just want to acknowledge that like grad school, it does not have to be a race. It can be a journey, however long that might be. And I have dealt with this kind of like panic over, oh my God, I'm taking too long. Like, what is this going to look like when people see like I got my bachelor's in 2014 and then I got my master's in 2021? Like, what was I doing with all that time? Like, no one cares. Like, I did so much during that time. I got so much great experience, life experience. And ultimately, you're going to get your degree. To get to the spirit of this question, because a lot of that revolves around advisor communication, just say what works for you. I wasted a lot of time trying to conform to what past advisors and people that I was working with were sort of saying without saying. So I was kind of guessing at what they needed from me, and they were not really sure what I was doing. And so something that really helped was with my current advisor, Dr. Tony Perez at Old Dominion. Wonderful human being, wonderful person. If you get to connect with him at AARA, highly recommend. Just kind of having a one-to-one, like, okay, we're embarking on this big project together that you're really only going to do once in your life, the dissertation. What kind of feedback is going to be helpful for you to receive, and how do you want to receive it? One of my colleagues, who is in my lab, has noted that, for her, what doesn't work is to receive a ton of inline feedback, right? Like that just really throws her off to see a ton of comments and a ton of like rewording and rewriting. I love that, like that helps me feel like this is kind of collaborative, even though it's not. But everyone is different. And so having that meeting with your advisor, if they're open to it, and just saying, okay, when I give you a draft, I might even ask you to give me feedback on this section in this way. And then they will know also how you prefer to receive that feedback. And that can be so, so, so helpful.
I can jump in here. So I will also say I've been very fortunate, and I feel like this is something that can vary a lot between people and even across programs. I've been very fortunate. I have a fabulous advisor. Feel very close with her. It's Dr. Shirley Yu at OSU. We set up regular meetings, so we meet bi-weekly. I know that might not be everyone's experience to be able to have that much contact with their advisor, but that's something that works for the two of us, is having those regular check-ins every other week. So sometimes that looks like checking in to look ahead at what courses I'm going to be taking next semester, right? Meeting those milestones. It might be talking about, what to expect from a candidacy kickoff meeting, for example. So just being able to talk about some of those big milestones with your advisor. I think being willing to say and ask, what does this look like, and ask what their expectations are. Sometimes there can be this feeling of like, you should already know, but that's not the case, right? Being willing to ask and say, hey, tell me what this looks like, from your experience. They have a lot of expertise that they can offer. This is not their first time doing it, even though it's your first time. So really lean on them and be willing to ask them questions and rely on their expertise as well to guide you through these milestones, because truly they're here to help you do that, right? That's one of their big roles, is to be able to help you meet those milestones successfully. So just being willing to communicate, ask questions, those have been things that have been really helpful for me, and also helps me get my advisor's expertise in these areas too.
Yeah, my experience in terms of communicating with advisors was very similar to what Ariana said. It was like a bi-weekly meeting kind of situation. So I was updating them on my progress. And if I was struggling with something, then I was sharing it at those meetings and getting their insights and input on how to navigate that. I want to take one of the things that I think Ariana White kind of mentioned, that this is your journey. I kind of want to add to that a little bit and say that, even like that's because this PhD is obviously a pretty long journey, and it's so intensive that you can get kind of lost in the moment itself and lose sight of what your final goal is. And I think that is something to be mindful of at every point of time, that what is the long-term goal that I want to achieve, like after the PhD, what comes next, or what do I want to be prepared, what kind of jobs do I want to be prepared for next, let's put it that way. That I think is important to have in mind for yourself, so that you can articulate it to your advisors as well, in terms of the need that you have, because you want to be able to clearly articulate that this is what I want after I'm done with the PhD, so that they can also help either personally help you with their advice and experience, or connect you with people who can provide you with the kind of insights that you are looking for to accomplish your long-term career goals. So I think that's something that I would kind of add to what both the Arianas have said earlier. And then I think that's pretty much, like, I just wanted to add those 2 points in addition to what they discussed about this being your own journey and communicating with your advisors regularly. One last thing that I want to again add in terms of the communication that you have with your advisor. One of the things that I have noticed is that when, again, students get very anxious if they are, let's say, not meeting their own self-set goals, or they have kind of there has been a delay, or they're struggling with something, I think communicate immediately. I think that is because sometimes people wait on it because they feel like whatever the reason might be, for various reasons, they might not be communicating what they're struggling with to their advisors. I think that creates, like, again, having been on both sides of this, I feel like that is very often considered unprofessional if you kind of go off the grid completely, as opposed to you saying that, hey, I'm not being able to do this, or this is something I'm really struggling with. People respond to that much more positively and can actually help you with, because they obviously it's not their first time, like one of the panelists said earlier. So definitely communicate sooner than later when you are struggling with something and you're not being able to meet your goals at a time that you had probably thought you would be able to finish something.
I want to stamp the idea that you gotta communicate. It's what we're all saying, but I think it's actually really difficult to do in practice, because we all have different relationships with our advisors. My relationship is very positive, but I don't have a weekly scheduled meeting on the books, which I think makes it harder, because then it's incumbent upon me to make that request. And that right now it's even harder because my advisor happens to be on sabbatical. So there's an added challenge there. The thing, though, I want to mention when it comes to how do I communicate and what do I use my advisor for, is coming in with a direct question, knowing that I want to ask this specific thing, or I want feedback, or I want to just have an open dialogue. Because if I know what my goal is, it's easier for me to communicate my goal and then for us to have a productive conversation. But something that we've been all focused on, and it's of course by virtue of the question, is the advisor. But at this point, we're talking about a committee. So I use my committee members for different purposes. One committee member, we talk about, let's say, theory. Another committee member may be about specific implications. Another committee member is only there to talk to me about the structure of my dissertation, which is just me exaggerating on these topics. But I think that we're focused on one person when we actually have multiple people we can go to.
Yeah, I definitely agree regarding that final point. Like, I think it makes more sense to get feedback from different people if that's a possibility, at least. I've heard that also from some people from my own school. So yeah, I do think that based on what the answers are like to this question, it's like you need to know yourself, like what you need, and based on that, what your priorities are, and that kind of affects everything else. So I think in the process we're learning ourselves. I think this came up in one of the panels before. It's like in during PhD, part of it is about learning yourself, I think. So yeah, I don't remember which one, but I think that makes a lot of sense in this case. Okay, so in that, so on that note, I would next go to the next question, which is like, how does not meeting these milestones delay your PhD, and how would this affect your prospects or careers post PhD? Some of you did talk about careers as a goal, as a thing to look up for. So, how does not meeting these milestones affect that, like change that? I think that also came up somewhere as an answer to today's questions, but we can dig a little deeper into that. So
my experience on the job market as a PhD student, I think I can kind of talk about, what the milestones imply for your like job search process a little bit, because I interviewed for both academic as well as non-academic jobs, and I was looking at both at that point of time. So that, again, just taking a step back, because I have always, like, I think that, I feel like that's the way I was looking at my PhD journey, that I wanted to be competitive for both types of research jobs. And so that's something that I had in mind while building my experiences, deciding what to say yes to and what to say no to. One of the things that I did notice when I was being interviewed at these positions, like obviously with academic jobs, I'm pretty sure, I think, in your own programs, you're getting the same kind of messaging that the number of publications will matter. So the where are you publishing? How many publications do you have? Those are the things that definitely do matter. But for the non-academic research positions, I think they care a lot more about your research skills and your ability to translate research. So my piece, like the conversation piece that I had shared the link with you all, like in a non-academic research space, those kinds of publications definitely have a lot of value. They probably wouldn't care about my peer-reviewed academic publication, no matter how much blood and sweat has gone into it, but they care about that. And so that is a difference. So again, when you're thinking about, how can you what are you writing and where are you publishing it? I think keeping a balance of those two goals, especially if you want to, again, target both types of positions, both academic and outside of academia jobs in education, then I think that's something to be mindful of, given just my own experience of being interviewed for various positions. I'm going to stop there.
I can quickly say that my experience thus far in the job market, which has only been in the academic space, so I can't speak to industry, is these things can matter, but also the job market is always in flux, and it's a bit of luck of the draw. So what's happening now may be worse or better than what's happening in a month from now or in a year from now. So Does a delay hurt or help? I can't say, because it really does feel like a lottery some of the times, where you never know what's the right time or best time. So do the thing that makes sense for you and get it done in your timeline, because that's what makes the most sense for you, not someone else.
And I know that it like really hurts your heart if there's the perfect opportunity that is just not possible for you at this given moment because of where your timeline is. And I acknowledge that that sucks. I have been in that exact situation. It hurts so much, but there's nothing you can do, at the end of the day. So you just have to wave goodbye and acknowledge that there's going to be more coming, more in your future. And that one's just not going to be it. You're on your own PhD journey, and that's what you're doing now. So finish that and see what's out there.
I guess I'll add to say, speaking a little bit more perhaps broadly, I think that there can be a lot of like self-critiquing around not meeting milestones. But again, some of these milestones can be a little bit arbitrary, and it's okay to delay some of them as well. So I think before Ariana was talking about, this is your own journey. And I think that that advice really applies here as well. I will also add that, if there is a milestone that you're not going to meet, again, communicate with your advisor or your committee about it, so that they can provide support and help. But also, if there's a milestone you're not going to meet and things are starting to look a little bit different for you, give yourself grace and have a plan B that you're happy with. I've recently encountered some things in my personal life that have altered my trajectory a little bit, and you just have to kind of be willing to go with the flow, and recognize that there's things outside of school that are important too. So just sort of giving yourself grace and having that flexibility, and reminding yourself, having some perspective on kind of the bigger picture. Those are things that have been helpful for me, as I think about meeting milestones or not meeting milestones, and delaying certain things.
Yeah, I like the answers, and I one of the things that I did like was the acceptance part that came up in the answer. Like it is that actually is something like, right. So yeah, just because you see someone else like meeting the milestones on time, and then you think, oh yeah, I could have done that, but now you're here, right? Like, and what can you do from here is kind of often a more practical approach. So it makes sense looking at it from that perspective. So I like that answer. Okay, so here's the final question from the panelists, and I welcome audience questions at this point because we'll start like asking them as well. So this question is about collaboration. So you can also just take it out of context, as in here we are quoting it as senior PhD students, but we can actually probably expand that definition there. So the question is, how do you work with senior PhD students in your lab who may have successfully completed these milestones? And what are some ideas you could borrow from them and try out yourself?
My little anecdote about how other members of my lab have felt like they want to receive feedback is basically my only contribution to this question. Like, I have chat widely with the people in your various circles to hear how their experiences were, because that alone taught me so much about what worked for her, what works for me. Like, I had maybe never even really considered, like, when I receive a draft back, what do I really want that feedback to look like? So as much as you can, get into the details with people if they're willing to share. I think it's so helpful and helps to break down those barriers, reveal hidden curriculums, all kinds of things like that.
I would agree. I would say that the senior PhD students that I've talked to in my own experience have offered some of the best, both relational support as well as just been wonderful resources for hitting curriculum things, what works, what didn't work for them. one of the best pieces of advice I ever got when I was a master's student came from Alison Cuenca, who was just talking about some practical tips. She said she leaves her self notes when she's doing like data cleaning or working on a manuscript. That way she knows what she wants to do next time she opens that document or that data file. That way you don't have to spend a ton of time reorienting yourself to what you're doing. So it's things like that, those kinds of tips and tricks that become really valuable down the line. And those senior students in your lab just have lots of advice that they can offer. So cultivating those relationships and taking opportunities to get to know those students can be really valuable. Like I said, both for your own sanity as a graduate student, that relational support, but then also for some of those more practical resources as well.
My experience in terms of working with senior PhD students when I was a student, I think they resulted in publications for me. Like I was a co-author on like these were like early publications, so that was a valuable opportunity just to get to see how someone was leading a project and transforming that into a manuscript. So kind of learned a lot along the way in terms of how manuscripts are prepared, how the peer review process works, and how the senior graduate student was responding to the feedback that was being they received from the reviewers. So that was incredibly valuable. I will also say that it is important to, just like it is important to diversify your mentors, I think it's also equally important to get to do, even with PhD students. I think one of the things that this is something I did not have, but I was able to offer it to someone else who was in the OSU EdPsych PhD program, which is based on identity a little bit, because like for me as an international student in an EdPsych program, when I was on the job market, I had to deal with multiple visa-related issues, which was not the case for a lot of other students who might have been senior students in the program. But since I had that experience of navigating conversations around visa when I was on the job market, that was something I was able to pay it forward to someone else who had the same shared identity in the EdPsych program as me, and was also navigating the job market with the requirement that they would need a work visa. So I think, again, paying attention to life experiences and identity of other people that might be similar to yours can also be extremely valuable in gaining insight into how to navigate the program and academia in general, I think.
I found that senior PhD students were wonderful in helping me navigate expectations from faculty. For example, when I receive feedback, and a lot of times I receive a lot of inline feedback, and I want to ask the question, how much do I have to accept? And understanding when to accept, when to push back, when to placate was a really valuable thing that I just did not know. So that was a good example for me when I needed someone else's help to navigate those expectations. The other thing that I found was not inside of my own university or my college, but actually was inside this group. So Arun earlier referred to the affinity groups, now referred to as the grad students discuss. This group, that group at the time, especially while I was in the midst of my proposal writing, was invaluable. A space to just hear other people's perspectives, understand what's going on, and also gain strategies from others who are in the exact same experience. So when possible, I think that it's important to use your social networks to both share those moments when you need to vent a little bit, but also learn how other people are navigating them as well, so that you can bring in those other experiences that you would never have heard otherwise, because you're in your own context. So outside of university contexts, I think are really helpful.
Yeah, lots of wonderful ideas here. Yeah, and I am out of questions, but I will try to think as
So Arun, I actually had a couple questions just because I actually will be doing quals next semester. So I thought it was a good opportunity for me to ask some. So I posted one, and then I can post the next one after they answer.
So Jillian has 2 questions in the chat. So can you all speak to the 3 publication structure of dissertation? And how did you go about choosing that versus the traditional structure?
I can quickly just say I wanted to go the 3 publication structure route. And I was going to. It only was I was dissuaded once it didn't make sense for the type of work I was doing. And I think that's really the key detail. It is, are you actually doing different projects that should then have multiple publications, or is it really one cohesive piece? So when it came down to it, even though I didn't want it to be, my piece was one cohesive piece that required that. So part of it was just, what am I doing? What are the research questions I'm asking? And is it one thing or not?
I'm gonna build on that point. I think so a couple of different ways to look at it. So let's say that someone is using, I have had a very close friend who was in my cohort and now a colleague, obviously, she worked on a secondary data set. And when you're doing something like that, where you're not collecting your own data, for her, it made sense to do a 3 publication kind of like she basically created like she had 3 manuscripts which were interrelated, but it was possible because the data was already there and she could have like 3 research questions that she could answer with that data set. So it definitely made sense. And I think this is, again, going back to that idea about, milestones and your overarching goal of what you want to do after the PhD. If you do have an option of working on a secondary data instead of if that option exists for you, if you do have access to a data set like that, that's something that you should be thinking about. Because one thing that you do not, unlike a situation where you are collecting your own data, where you will need to establish relationships with people in the research site and then go ahead and execute the project, over here you're essentially saving time on that process. The expectation obviously in that situation would be that you're going to do something innovative methodologically with the data set that justifies that taking that route. But that's definitely possible when you do have a big data set where you can answer 3 research questions that are interrelated and can build on each other. The other situation where even if you are collecting your own data, that I've seen the 3 manuscript structure work, is where, let's say that there's if there was a master's ed psych student in the program who did some sort of a pilot study before they began the PhD project, like that, I think can sometimes, so if there's a pilot study that kind of serves as a preface to your big dissertation project, sometimes those small projects can also be part of your dissertation structure, and again can be 3 different manuscripts. For my own thing, I think going back to what Joey was saying, it was really the nature of the project. I collected my own data. It took me a whole year to establish a relationship with the school district that I was going to work with. And so that takes a lot of time. And so that over there, the 3 manuscript structure was not something that was a viable option for me. And I went down the traditional dissertation structure where you have like the chapter wise, it's basically one study and divided into different chapters. So yeah, but when I look back, I definitely think about that decision being a pretty key decision. At that time, I didn't realize the long-term implications of it, but for many of you who are able to make that, if you do have that option of working on secondary data versus collecting your own data, think about it practically as well in terms of how many publications it can lead to, and obviously your research interests have to align with what you eventually end up spending your time on. But it is something that will have a long-term implication in terms of how many publications and how quickly you're able to get those out.
Sorry, did everyone go? I'm sorry if I. Okay. So Jalen also asks another question here, which is like, what is truly the difference between calls and dissertation proposal? And it seems that there is a lot of overlap in the 2 milestones.
This one might be lots of different answers for each person in the room because so many requirements differ. But yes, they do overlap in some ways. my quals process was basically to write the first part of a grant proposal. So like, you know, literature review, purpose statement. We didn't have to do like a budget or anything like that, but essentially doing all the legwork for getting a grant proposal ready. And the idea was that that legwork would inform a lot of the literature that you were using for your dissertation proposal eventually. So like everything starts to narrow toward the dissertation, and then the dissertation, it's like a funnel on its side, right? So you start grad school with this broad, you know, you're reading broadly, and then you start to narrow toward the dissertation, and then the dissertation's like the cornerstone for your research agenda, and then you just like go back out again, right? So they can inform each other, they can overlap, but also if you change your mind on what you want to do for your dissertation, that is okay. What I ended up thinking I was going to do for my dissertation when I was in the quals part is totally different from what I'm doing right now in reality. So it's a process, but hopefully, and it sounds like, I mean, Joey, what you were describing your process is like, that's so helpful for the job market. Like, I think a lot of programs are trying to move toward making the quals process less like jumping through hoops that are on fire and moving, and more like, let's make this helpful and useful for the doctoral candidate on their journey. I hope.
I'll just quickly say, for us at Temple, they're not related at all, because one is directly related to your dissertation, the other one's not. The comprehensive evaluation that we have, as I said before, is a lot of the job materials. And even though the manuscript and the comments proposal might be associated with your dissertation, they will not necessarily be even close to being enough for what will then be the start of, if you do traditional, like an introduction and then your literature review, your theoretical, etc.
I guess I can kind of echo what's already been said a little bit, but yes, there's definitely a lot of overlap in these two milestones, although they are different. So, and again, this will, I think, vary depending on institution. But so for our qualifying exams at OSU, we did 8 weeks of writing traditionally over the summer, but not always. And then defend those orally. And then ideally, you know, what you've done toward your quals will also then be in service of your dissertation proposal. But I also know that a lot of people start out thinking, you know, that they're going to do one thing and then end up completely changing. And that's totally fine too. So yeah, if you can, I think using what you did for your quals toward your dissertation proposal is helpful. But it's definitely, you know, it can change. You're not necessarily, it's not set in stone. Just because you did your qualifying exams on one topic doesn't mean that you're going to be held to that for your dissertation proposal. I will also add too that I know even within institutions, sometimes the like structure of the dissertation proposal can vary quite a lot. So this is probably another one of those areas where talking to your advisor and the rest of your committee members to understand their expectations for your dissertation proposal will be really important.
What I'll add to this is that even the conversation that ensues in terms of like how you're talking about, so that when I think what Ariana just said, that, you know, in a qualifying exam, once you've submitted your responses, you're kind of like defending your responses to your committee and they are evaluating you. Whereas for the dissertation proposal, I think if I remember, it was more like a dialogue, not that the qualifying exams are not a dialogue, but I think look at both of them as opportunities where you are engaging in dialogue with other scholars who have more experience and expertise on that particular topic. In the qualifying exam, they are evaluating you, of course, but for the dissertation proposal, I think the feedback can be extremely helpful because it's almost like they're serving as your first round of peer reviewers, and it's a pre-registered study. At that point, you don't have data, but you are kind of getting feedback on the methodology. Particularly, the feedback on methodology will be much more detailed, and the focus of the dissertation proposal conversation will definitely revolve a lot around the methodological choices that you're making and your ability to kind of justify that, and also consider the practical the practical concerns. Because let's say that you want to propose, if your proposal is great, but let's say that it's extremely ambitious in scale, you might get some pushback, and because people want you to finish on time and they don't want to set you up for failure. So I think that it's not just about the methodological rigor, but also about what is doable within this particular timeline for graduation. So I think that's also another thing that is part of that conversation.
Okay, so I was deliberately being silent so that people speak up, because I have the tendency to. But okay, I will also ask out loud, do people have any questions? I mean, did anything from all the discussion that happened so far trigger any thoughts in your mind, like anything that causes anxiety, things that you might just feel like, okay, you can share, and we can stop recording as well for this brief 10-15 minutes if you would like to be like this to be an open conversation.